Today, I will show you how 3 nutrients fix your thinning hair in just 90 days. If you are over 60, your hair is thinning, and your doctor has told you your blood tests came back normal. I want you to stay with us for the next few minutes, because there is a very specific reason that answer may not be complete. Most people in this situation have already done the obvious things. They have changed shampoos. They have tried supplements. Biotin is usually the first one. They have read about DHT and hormones. And for most of them, nothing has moved the needle. I'm Marcus Reid, your senior health coach.
And I'm Suki Yamamoto, wellness specialist. This channel exists to give you research-backed information without claims we cannot defend. What we are going to cover today is a specific category of hair-thinning driver that is near universal in adults over 60 and almost universally missed, not because it is obscure, because the standard diagnostic tools are not calibrated to find it.
3 nutrients. All 3 have documented direct mechanisms affecting hair follicle function. All 3 decline in the over 60 population, not because people are eating badly, but for a biological reason we are going to explain. And all 3 require a specific blood test that most standard panels do not include unless you ask.
The 3 are ferritin, which is your stored iron, vitamin D3, and zinc. Each one has its own mechanism. Each one has its own threshold below which follicle function is compromised, and the gap between what your doctor calls normal and what the research identifies as sufficient for hair health is, in each case, significant.
But before we get to those, there is a question that needs answering first. If someone is eating reasonably well, how do they end up deficient in all 3? Let's jump into the studio.
The answer is not in the diet, it is in the gut. As we age, gastric acid secretion declines. This is well established in the literature. A 1997 study by Hurwitz and colleagues, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, found measurable reductions in gastric acid output in a significant proportion of adults over 60. In some studies, the figure is as high as 30 to 40% of older adults, showing clinically reduced gastric acid secretion.
And stomach acid is what breaks food down, so less acid means less absorption.
Specifically, gastric acid is required for the conversion of dietary iron, ferric iron, into the form the intestine can absorb, which is ferrous iron. Without sufficient acid, that conversion is incomplete. You can eat iron-rich foods every day and still be absorbing a fraction of what you were absorbing at 40. Zinc follows a similar pathway. It also requires an acidic gut environment for optimal absorption. And vitamin D3, being fat-soluble, depends not only on gastric acid, but on adequate bile production and fat digestion, both of which also decline with age.
So the diet has not changed. The body's ability to process what is in the diet has changed.
Correct. And this is why a dietary review is insufficient as a diagnostic tool here. Someone can be eating red meat, leafy greens, eggs, and oily fish, and still present with ferritin, D3, and zinc levels that are too low for optimal hair follicle function. The intervention point is not always the food. Sometimes it is what happens after the food.
Which is also why the blood panel matters more than the food diary.
Precisely. Now let us look at each nutrient separately, because the mechanisms are distinct and the practical implications are different for each.
Let us start with ferritin, because I think most people, if they have done any research on this, have come across iron and hair loss. But ferritin specifically, that is a different thing.
It is. Serum iron and serum ferritin measure different things. Serum iron measures the iron circulating in your blood at the moment of the test. Ferritin is a protein that stores iron. It is your body's iron reserve. The hair follicle draws on ferritin stores during active growth. If those stores are depleted, the follicle can be forced into a resting phase earlier than it would otherwise be. The hair sheds. It may not regrow at the same density.
And a standard blood panel, does it measure ferritin?
Not automatically. A standard full blood count measures hemoglobin, red blood cell count, and serum iron in some cases. Ferritin is a separate test. You need to request it by name, and when you do receive the result, The reference range your lab uses typically marks anything above 12 micrograms per liter as normal, possibly as low as 10.
That seems low.
The 2002 study by Rushton, published in Clinical and Experimental Dermatology, this was a review of nutritional factors and hair loss, identified a threshold of 70 micrograms per liter as the level below which hair shedding was significantly elevated in women experiencing hair loss. A reading of 25 or 30 would be reported as within normal range. It would not trigger any clinical concern, but it may be less than half the level the hair follicle needs to function well.
So someone could have a ferritin reading that is technically normal and still be running on empty as far as the hair is concerned.
That is the distinction that matters here. There is a gap, sometimes a very large gap, between not clinically deficient and sufficient for follicle function. And that gap is where a significant number of people over 60 are sitting. Particularly women, because premenopausal iron loss through menstruation can deplete ferritin stores over decades, and those stores may never have been fully rebuilt.
How long does it take to correct low ferritin?
That depends on the degree of deficiency and the method of correction. Through diet and supplementation, under GP supervision, meaningful increases in ferritin take 3 to 6 months. What the Rushton research and subsequent studies show is that measurable reductions in shedding can be observed within 90 days of correction beginning, not at the point of full repletion, but partway through the process. The claim we can defend is measurable reduction in shedding in 90 days, not hair regrowth, not reversal of thinning, shedding reduction.
That distinction matters.
It does. And I want to be clear about it before we go any further. We are not making a reversal claim here. The research does not support that. What it supports is a meaningful, measurable reduction in the rate of loss when ferritin is corrected into the functional range.
What about vitamin D3? Because I think most people know they should probably be taking it, but I don't think most people understand why it connects to hair specifically.
That is a fair summary of where most people are. Let us fix that. Vitamin D3 is a fat-soluble vitamin that functions in many respects more like a hormone than a vitamin. It binds to specific receptors throughout the body, receptors known as vitamin D receptors, or VDRs. Those receptors are found in many tissue types. They are also found in the keratinocytes of the hair follicle.
The cells in the follicle itself?
Correct. A 2012 paper by DeMay, published in Archives of Biochemistry and Biophysics, summarized research showing that vitamin D receptor activity in the follicle is involved in regulating the hair cycle, specifically the transition into and out of the anagen phase. Anagen is the active growth phase of the hair cycle. When VDR signaling is disrupted, which can happen when D3 levels are chronically low, follicles may spend less time in the growth phase and more time in the resting phase, known as telogen. The result is not dramatic sudden loss. It is a gradual, sustained increase in shedding and a decrease in regrowth density.
And this is worse after 60 because the body makes less D3 from sunlight.
Yes, there are two mechanisms at work simultaneously. First, the skin contains a compound called 7-dehydrocholesterol, which sunlight converts into the precursor form of D3. Aging skin contains significantly less of this compound. A 1992 study by McLaughlin and Hollick in the Journal of Clinical Investigation found that the skin of a 70-year-old produces roughly 75% less previtamin D3 from the same sun exposure as a 20-year-old. That is a substantial reduction in the primary natural source.
3/4 less from the same amount of sun.
Roughly. And second, because D3 is fat-soluble, its absorption from food and supplements depends on adequate fat digestion and bile acid production, both of which also decline with age. So the capacity to produce D3 is reduced. The capacity to absorb it from food is also reduced. And the result is that D3 deficiency in the over 60 population is genuinely prevalent, even in countries with good sun exposure.
What does too low mean here? What number should people be looking for?
The standard reference range flags anything above 50 nanomoles per liter as sufficient. A 2013 study by Reid and colleagues, published in Skin Pharmacology and Physiology, looked at serum D3 levels in women presenting with hair loss compared to controls. The hair loss group showed significantly lower D3 levels, and a meaningful proportion of participants in the hair loss group were within the normal range by standard reference criteria, but below levels associated with optimal follicle function in the research literature.
There is that gap again.
There is. The clinical guidance for bone and immune health sets the floor at 50 nanomoles per liter. Some researchers working specifically on hair and skin outcomes suggest levels closer to 100 nanomoles per liter are associated with better outcomes. That is not universally agreed upon, and I want to be honest about where the evidence is strong and where it is still emerging. But the principle holds. The standard normal threshold and the hair health threshold are not the same number.
One more thing on D3. I've heard about taking D3 with K2. Is that relevant here?
It is worth mentioning. Vitamin D3 promotes calcium absorption. Vitamin K2 directs that calcium to the right places, bones and teeth, rather than soft tissue. When supplementing D3 at doses above 1,000 IU per day over an extended period, combining with K2 is a reasonable precaution. Your GP or pharmacist can advise on the appropriate ratio, but the K2 point is about safety, not about the hair mechanism itself. Zinc is the third nutrient in this picture, and it operates through two distinct mechanisms. The first is structural. Hair is composed primarily of keratin, a fibrous protein. Zinc is a cofactor in the enzymes required for keratin synthesis. Without adequate zinc, the structural quality of the hair shaft is compromised, and follicle cell division slows.
So low zinc affects not just how much hair you have, but the quality of what is there.
Correct. Finer, more fragile strands, increased breakage, and in more significant deficiency, increased shedding. A 2013 study by Kill and colleagues, published in the Annals of Dermatology, measured serum zinc concentrations in patients presenting with hair loss compared to healthy controls. The hair loss group had significantly lower serum zinc levels across the board, both in male and female pattern loss and in non-pattern shedding conditions.
And the second mechanism?
The second mechanism involves an enzyme that plays a role in DHT production. We discussed DHT in an earlier episode, the hormone that, at elevated levels, miniaturizes hair follicles over time. Zinc is involved in the regulation of the enzyme responsible for the conversion of testosterone to DHT. When zinc levels are low, that regulation becomes less efficient.
So low zinc can contribute to higher DHT activity.
The relationship is not linear or simple. I do not want to overstate it, but the connection is documented, and it is one of the reasons zinc deficiency is relevant specifically to the type of thinning most people over 60 are experiencing, which is hormonally influenced in part.
And zinc has the same absorption problem, the stomach acid issue.
The same mechanism exactly. Zinc absorption is highly dependent on gastric acid. Animal source zinc, from meat and shellfish, is more bioavailable than plant source zinc, partly because plant sources contain phytates, which bind zinc and reduce absorption. After 60, with reduced gastric acid production, even the more bioavailable animal source zinc becomes harder to absorb at the same rate as earlier in life.
What should someone be looking for on a zinc blood test?
A serum zinc is the most accessible measure, though it is not a perfect indicator of total body zinc status. The standard normal range is typically 10 to 18 micromoles per liter, depending on the lab. Levels at the lower end of that range, in the presence of hair thinning, are worth discussing with your GP. It is a cheap test to run, and the deficiency is relatively inexpensive to correct.
Let us make this practical. Someone is listening to this and thinking, I need to do something. What are the actual steps?
3 steps, in order. Step 1. The blood panel. Request the following tests from your GP and ask for them by name. Serum ferritin, not just serum iron or hemoglobin. 25-hydroxyvitamin D, that is the active storage form of D3, sometimes written as 25-OHD, and serum zinc.
Those are 3 separate tests that may not be on a standard panel.
Correct. In some healthcare systems, you may need to specifically request each one. Some GPs will run them without question when you explain the context. Others may require some discussion. It is worth being specific about what you are asking for and why. A printout or a note with those 3 test names is useful to bring to the appointment.
And when the results come back?
Step 2. Interpret the results against hair health thresholds, not just standard reference ranges. For ferritin, note your result. If it is below 70 micrograms per liter, regardless of whether it is flagged as normal, it is worth discussing with your GP in the context of hair thinning. For vitamin D3, if your 25-OH result is below 75 to 100 nanomoles per liter, there is a reasonable basis for correction. For zinc, if your result is in the lower quarter of the reference range in the presence of hair thinning, that is a meaningful data point.
And at this point, most people would go straight to Amazon.
Most people would, and I want to address that directly.
Biotin.
Biotin is the supplement most commonly marketed for hair health. I want to be accurate about what the evidence says. A 2017 systematic review by Patel and colleagues, published in Skin Appendage Disorders, reviewed the published literature on biotin supplementation for hair and nail growth. The conclusion was that biotin supplementation shows clinical benefit only in people with a documented biotin deficiency, which is genuinely rare in healthy adults eating a varied diet. Most studies that reported positive outcomes had significant methodological limitations, including no control groups and very small sample sizes. The case for biotin, in the absence of a diagnosed deficiency, is weak.
So buying biotin because your hair is thinning is probably not the right move.
It may not be harmful, but spending money on a supplement that addresses a deficiency you are unlikely to have, while not testing for the deficiencies that are genuinely prevalent in your age group, is not the most useful first step. The most useful first step is the blood panel.
Step 3.
Step 3 is correction, under GP guidance. The specifics will depend on your results. For ferritin, dietary sources of iron include red meat, liver, lentils, spinach, fortified cereals. Consuming vitamin C alongside iron-rich plant foods significantly increases absorption. The ascorbic acid converts ferric iron to the more absorbable ferrous form. If dietary correction is insufficient, your GP may recommend an iron supplement, but this is something to manage with medical oversight, because iron supplementation can cause problems at excessive doses. For vitamin D3, dietary sources include oily fish, egg yolks, and fortified foods, but food sources alone are rarely sufficient to correct a significant deficiency. A daily supplement of 1,000 to 2,000 IU of D3 combined with K2 is the most common recommendation. Your GP can advise based on your result. For zinc, oysters are the most concentrated food source by a significant margin. Beef lamb, pumpkin seeds, and chickpeas are also useful sources. If supplementing, 15 to 25 milligrams of elemental zinc per day is a commonly used range. Taking zinc with food reduces the risk of nausea, which is the most frequent side effect of zinc supplementation at higher doses.
And the 90-day timeline? What should someone realistically expect to see?
Within 90 days of correcting a ferritin deficiency, the most studied of the three, the research supports a measurable reduction in daily shedding. Hair shedding is typically measured by counting hairs lost during washing or brushing over a defined period. A reduction in that number is the realistic early outcome. What you will not see in 90 days is significant new growth or a visible increase in density. That process, if it occurs, takes longer because hair grows approximately 1 centimeter per month, and the follicle needs to complete a full cycle before the effects become visible at the surface.
Less shedding, not more hair, those are not the same thing.
They are not the same thing. And framing your expectations correctly matters, because if someone expects to see visibly thicker hair in 90 days and they do not, they conclude the intervention failed and stop. When in fact, the biological process that was running in the wrong direction has been corrected, and the visible improvement is still months away.
Let us summarize.
3 things to take from today. First, nutrient deficiency is a correctable driver of hair thinning that is near universal in adults over 60, not because of poor diet, but because gastric acid declines with age and absorption of ferritin, D3, and zinc all drop as a result. The food may be there, the absorption may not be. Second, standard blood panels do not automatically test for the right markers. You need to request serum ferritin, 25-hydroxy vitamin D, and serum zinc by name. And when the results come back, the hair health threshold for each is higher than the standard normal reference range. A result that is technically normal may still be below the level the follicle needs. Third, the first step is the blood panel. Not a supplement, not a new shampoo. The data comes first, and the intervention follows the data. The 90-day claim is specific. Measurable reduction in shedding for people correcting a ferritin deficiency based on timelines from peer-reviewed research, not reversal, not regrowth, reduction in the rate of loss. For someone who has been watching their hair thin for years without understanding why, that is a meaningful and achievable outcome.
If this was useful, and I think it was, the like button genuinely helps more people find it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss next week. And if you have had your blood panel done and found one of these deficiencies, I genuinely want to hear what happened. Drop it in the comments, because your experience is useful to other people watching this, and we read every single one.